Hello and good afternoon. Welcome to Rappler Talk. I am Jello Gonzalez. In this episode, we are talking about the Facebook hack, which happened in the final week of September and affected 50 million Facebook users around the world. We're going to specifically talk about the legal ramifications that Facebook may be facing here in the Philippines. And to help us understand that, we have attorney Francis Acero, the Complaints and Investigations Chief of the NPC. First off, what does Complaints and Investigations Chief do?
Well, we go and investigate if people have complaints. If the commission sees something that's strange, we go and look at it. We go and poke holes here and there if we see something that shouldn't be there. And more or less be the cops of data privacy.
So when Facebook got hacked, it was you that they got in touch with.
Right.
Yeah.
So we have a relationship with Facebook because we still have that older investigation.
Yeah.
So what happened was they emailed us at 12:49 in the morning, and they said that they had information and that those who were affected, they terminated their sessions with Facebook and changed the access keys. So we're like, okay, just keep us updated. And here we are.
Yeah. Prior to the report, people were actually posting on Facebook or on social media that they were getting logged out. Did you have an inkling that something was happening behind Facebook? Or?
Yes, because it's kind of standard procedure. If something happens, then you reset these tokens.
Yeah.
But I wasn't aware of the scope. I mean, I was part of those who were affected.
Yeah.
So I was thinking that I thought it was an entire system-wide event that Facebook crashed. In the early days of social media, these social media sites crashing was a fairly common occurrence, and I thought there might have been something that happened that caused it to crash, and I really didn't think much of it until we got word later on that midnight that something happened, and we're like, okay, just keep us posted.
Okay. So Facebook was able to report the breach in a timely manner, in a manner that was followed the rules set forth by the NPC.
Okay, let me be clear. We have a set guideline for things that you have to report. Facebook's notification did not fit that guideline, but also because they weren't reporting according to that guideline. This was just a heads up, FYI, that something had happened and they were looking into it.
Yeah.
So on that score, since it was purely voluntary, it was appreciated. But we're at the trust but verify kind of situation. So at some point, we expect to be able to see the digital forensics logs that were created as a result of this internal investigation from Facebook, and they've committed that they'll make that available.
Okay. You were talking about how data breaches are, they're actually a given now in the current state it's gonna happen.
It's gonna happen.
Okay.
It's a basic cybersecurity tenet that you cannot stop someone from entering any cyber fortress that you create. Nothing is ever 100% hack-proof, so to speak. Even computers that are isolated, you can still find a way to get to these computers. For example, Stuxnet, which was developed by the US and the Israeli Armed Forces, used flash drives to get from Israel to Iran's nuclear program. So even the most isolated computers, and these were computers that were off the grid, so they're not always vulnerable. So if there's a will, there's a way. But so we don't really punish anyone who gets a data breach, and that's something that we've been saying ever since the get-go, that if you have a data breach, we're not punishing the breach. We're going to punish those who do not take care of the data. So if you had data and you control data, you better live up to your responsibilities of protecting that data. Let's say you're involved in a car crash, right? just because you're in a car crash doesn't mean you're at fault. Same thing here.
So as long as there is due diligence on the part of the company who collects data,
I wouldn't call it due diligence. They have to do their utmost to protect the data. And if it falls short of that standard, then we have a problem.
Problem. I mean, this could come in the form of penalties or fines, would you say?
As a general rule, if you are a person or a personal information controller who does not live up to your obligations as a personal information controller, you could be hit with administrative penalties, you could be hit with civil penalties, and could be hit with criminal penalties. Let's go through that one by one. Administratively, we could issue a stop processing order. This means that you stop processing whatever data that you process. And if you're a company that relies on the processing of data, that can be a death sentence. So that's something we use very sparingly. Second, civil penalties. I think there's a story that broke several months ago that someone suing Facebook for Cambridge Analytica in Australia. Now, the minimum amount of civil damages that you can claim in Australia for breach, not a breach, but a violation of data privacy is around 1,500 Australian dollars. And those are civil damages. Those are paid directly to the persons who are affected. That doesn't go to the state. A fine goes to the state. So here, if you could prove that you had moral anxiety, sleepless nights, or you were bothered unduly by what happened, and that there was something wrong in the way that Facebook handled their data, then you could claim some damages. And finally, you could get criminal liability, and we make that finding. We recommend that to the Department of Justice, to the National Prosecution Service, for them to determine if there is probable cause and then file the appropriate information in court. After conviction in court, then you can get hit with a fine or jail sentence. Oh, sorry, fine and jail sentence.
Okay. In the EU, Facebook might be hit with a fine of around $1.6 billion. Are there similarities to the system they have there with the GDPR and what we have here?
Okay, our system is 80% GDPR. So, but in terms of fines, that's something we have to explore. We haven't published a schedule of fines yet, so we might not be able to do that. But if we do publish a schedule of fines, that would be different. In any case, I think the civil liability is always more, that number is always going to dwarf whatever fine we get if we do find. But, that story is also sort of misleading, because that's like saying, your internet speed is going to hit up to 5 Mbps, but really you're hitting something a lot smaller. And I think with Facebook, that may be the case with some of the other agencies, some of the what we call privacy enforcement authorities. But we don't want to get ahead of them. They have their own processes and they have their own findings.
Okay. So in Facebook's case, are they facing legal ramifications here in the Philippines?
Well,
but we don't have the data yet. We don't have the full report from them. But
we cannot all go ahead of the evidence. Okay. If you go ahead of the evidence, then you color whatever you have, and it's not fair. So let the evidence speak for itself, and when the evidence is there, then we find something.
Okay. When can we expect?
Well,
do you set a deadline for companies when these breaches happen? Like, in a week, you have to give us a fuller report of how things happen.
Each company is supposed to have their own breach reporting or security incident management protocol, and we expect companies to abide by that protocol. If the company doesn't have that, that's when we step in. Then it's much worse for the company if we have to step in. We can do it, but we let them take their own protocols first. Now, if there's assuming that the protocol works and it all checks out based on their own report, that's when we go in and say, okay, time for us to verify, trust but verify. I think that's standard for all regulatory agencies.
Okay. Let's talk about the end user.
Right.
Data breaches. It's so easy to become desensitized now to data breaches are happening left and right. So how about we reiterate just how important personal data is to the person, and what can actually happen if your personal data is stolen? What will the hackers do with it?
Okay, personal data is valuable in and of itself. So right now, there's a story that came out in the Sun that they saw Facebook data being sold on the internet on the dark web rather, for around £3. That's expensive. Experian did a study last year on Facebook data and actually all the other data that they could find on the darknet. And non-financial logins like Facebook, they used to go for around $1. So for me, this is more profiteering than anything. But what's really valuable in your Facebook data? It's them being able to build a profile of who you are and what you want. If you know what someone wants and what someone is, then you can easily, number one, guess his passwords for any other social media or any other account that he has. Number two, you can also figure out what they really want, what their deepest, darkest desires are. Knowing that, you can twist anything to suit that narrative, and then you can control behavior. If there's one thing that we've learned over the past 2 years, is that you can use data gathered that way to, quote-unquote, hack people, to make people respond a certain way. And we've seen that here a lot. And we've seen it also in other countries where social media is acting as the catalyst for creating these echo chambers. But these echo chambers are created with a purpose, right? And this creates an emotional response. And that emotional response, you can shape that any which way. The data to create that emotional response comes from, one, your social media presence. So if they're able to access even the thoughts that you keep to yourself, then it creates a more accurate picture and better social engineering. So that's the first and most dangerous part of it. The second part is it gives them a picture of who you are, where you are. So your physical location might be of something of interest to someone, especially if you're a high-profile person. So, all these considerations taken together, they present a grave threat to you that doesn't really manifest itself immediately. It might go over time. It might be something that because they're able now to guess your password with some degree of certainty, then you can feel something definitely.
It doesn't always feel readily tangible.
No,
That's
it's not.
the thing with your data being stolen. It doesn't feel the same as having your money directly stolen from you, right? Yeah.
Right. And the other thing about data privacy is you're supposed to be able to control all the data that's about you, that's around you, because decisions are being made every second based on that data. So if that data is now used to say create a false picture of you, so now someone's able to get credit off you but by identity theft, or if someone doesn't like you, that someone can now create more false information about you. That way you don't get any credit. So these are things that, and it takes time for these things to develop. So by the time that you do feel it, you're associating that whatever misfortune that you have on something else, and you don't really see that it's connected to your data.
Okay. Before this Facebook hack, one of the bigger hacks that happened here in the Philippines was the Comelec breach.
Right.
Do you see similarities between that hack and this one, especially in terms of liabilities?
Not really. In the Comelec breach, you had the situation where there was absolutely no attention paid to protecting data. So we went through files and we looked at evidence, and we didn't find any evidence that top management actually looking at protecting data. I'm not saying that this is the way with Facebook, but that's the context for Comelec. And Facebook is different, also in the terms of the data that they handle. Comelec had some data, and they had more data of certain people. Facebook data is pretty comprehensive. If you've checked like the data that Facebook has about you, sometimes it reaches into the gigabytes, right? So it's very different in terms of scope, in terms of what can happen. So it's really different.
Okay. But again, we'll have to wait for Facebook to actually see the full scope of if they put up the right protections, if they put up enough protections,
but
right?
You can see that in the digital evidence. That's a great thing about digital evidence gathering these days. It's something you can double check. It's very scientific, and it's forensic evidence. So you can cross check it. You can look at if there's any alteration, if there's any tampering. So.
So what I'm getting is the most important thing for a company now that handles any kind of data. It's that they need to provide the utmost protection they can.
Right.
Yeah, that's the main.
Data protection is always, we're always talking about compliance with data privacy, but compliance with data privacy is a limit, right? You're always moving toward compliance, but you're never there. And that, for us, that's where you ought to be. So because the threat landscape changes all the time, the danger, your vulnerabilities always change all the time. So you have to be prepared, you have to be alert, you have to be on your toes to face the next threat and adjust and make all your documents living documents. There's this Japanese concept called Kaizen. In Kaizen, everyone's working together toward the same goal, and even the smallest guy can pull the string and the factory stops making cars. Same thing goes for data privacy. The smallest guy should be able to alert the data protection officer, and the data protection officer should be willing to go and look at their documents and say, no, these things have to change. We're always in a state of readiness.
Okay. When do you say that a company didn't do enough? At which point you can say, oh, they didn't do enough, they have to be liable for this?
In law, we have a standard for negligence. It's if you are aware or should have been aware of something that could have caused damage and yet you did nothing about it. So in this case, really the threats are out there, but there are enough security papers and there's enough intelligence shared within the community to understand that these are the threats and these are where the threats are coming from. To understand what vulnerabilities are there. And if you don't understand those vulnerabilities when you ought to have understood them, and there's actions you ought to have taken and you didn't take them, then that's negligent. We've been pretty consistent in how we approach, how we talk to companies and say that, okay, this is what you need to do. You need to conduct your privacy impact assessment. First you have to appoint a data protection officer. Then you have to conduct a privacy impact assessment. Then you have to create your privacy management program. Then you implement your organizational, technical, and physical measures. And then you revise your documents every so often as necessary. So you take those 5 steps and you should be okay.
Okay. So far, do you think Facebook is living up to those standards?
Again, let's let the evidence speak for itself. Okay. The standards of digital collection of evidence are there. Okay. And if Facebook does not provide that digital evidence, then it's not going to look good. Then Facebook has committed, so it should be part of their internal processes.
Okay. Okay. So given that we don't know yet the full extent, what can Facebook users do in the interim to protect themselves?
We know some of what happened already, and fb.newsroom.com has a pretty extensive narration of what happened and what was taken. But some of that may be gobbledygook to some people, so you might need some people to translate it for you. Your other question was?
What can Facebook users do right now?
So the first thing that you need to do is you need to change your passwords. And this is just normal, standard digital hygiene. Change your passwords every so often. Make sure they're strong passwords. So nothing about your name, nothing that's close to your username, nothing that's related to anything personal about you, like your birthday, right? And something that's strong. So
we're using the same password across multiple sites.
Right,
That's
right, exactly. And so mixing small letters and capital letters and using special characters, and something that's long. Let me tell you why something that's long is better than something that's short, even though something that's short is more complex. Because the code cracker, it's the same thing. What will change and how long a password is to crack depends on the length of the password. Because the longer the password, the more combinations you have to go through. The more kinds of characters you use, the more permutations you have to go through per character. So that's what makes a password, a long password, better. However, it makes it also harder to memorize. But if you have that long password, though, to make it easier to memorize, you have a certain string, like part of the password is your name. That takes a lot of the guesswork out of the remaining characters. So it makes it easier to crack. So that's why we require that you use, combinations and long passwords. And
do you write down your password on a notebook, just in your head?
Just in your head. So it's easy just to have a mnemonic for it. Okay, so aside from that, you should use multi-factor authentication. So there are YubiKeys out there. Keys that Google's come out with some keys that allow you to use that physically to identify yourself as you when you log into your log into Google through your device. It uses near-field communication or Bluetooth. And Google's reported that those who use that password plus a device to authenticate yourself have experienced 0 phishing incidents. What you could also do is you can use an authenticator. So Google has an authenticator and Microsoft has an authenticator. So an authenticator has 6-digit combinations that that rotate every 30 seconds. And that if you log into a strange machine, whatever is sending you that authentication protocol is going to say that, oh, look, this is someone's trying to log in using your credentials. Enter this, and it's about to change, right? And that's changed. Okay. So, and then you have to input this. What the drawback of that is it makes this pretty valuable. So to counter that, you have to have software that allows you to overwrite everything in here until, in case it gets lost. So
it's all just measures to add layers, add locks, add padlocks to your cybersecurity.
It's easy if you live alone, especially. And you do understand the importance of having a deadbolt over your door lock. Having multi-factor authentication is the same thing. So, we understand it in terms of physical security because we see it, but in terms of digital security, it's something that still eludes the grasp of many.
Should Facebook users be on the lookout for possible strange activity on there because of this hack, or should that always be the case anyway?
Should always be the case anyway. Especially if you hadn't had multi-factor authentication or you've forgotten to log out of certain locations. Even with multi-factor authentication, that can be a problem sometimes. So if that's the case, you should always check it out. Facebook does have a feature where you can check where you've been logged in, and you can reset that every now and then. That way, all the access tokens that are in there are all expire, and then you can now just log in again.
The problem with this specific hack was that the hackers got the access token, right? So it kind of bypassed two-factor authentication because they have the actual key.
Right. So what Facebook tells us is they noticed that a large number of access tokens were being generated at one time. So with that, they just pulled the plug. So according to them, they don't have any evidence that any of the access tokens were actually used. And that's the problem with, when you evaluate evidence and there's no evidence, you can't prove a negative. So all you can say is most likely it wasn't used in an inappropriate manner, but there's no guarantee of that. So in lieu of that, you just go and take the corrective action anyway, and you should be set.
Okay. So just a final question. How do you see Facebook changing from this? Should they be even more vigilant with the way they handle data, the way they collect data?
Well,
if you were in charge, like, yeah.
Well, they should be. I mean, and I think especially with what's happened, not just with this, but over the past few months.
Cambridge Analytica.
Right.
Yeah.
So they should be a lot more aware of how important they are in handling data on a global basis, and how important it is for them to respond quickly and immediately to anything that happens. A little hiccup on Facebook, because we have 100% penetration, it gets to everyone here. So a bit more vigilance, a bit more, no, on everyone's part, not just Facebook. If I was the Zuck, yeah, I'd spend a lot more on privacy and security and being upfront and transparent with people.
Yeah. Okay. And with that, we end this episode of Rappler Talk. This has been Jello Gonzalez, and thank you very much, Attorney Acero.
All right.
Thank you for watching.